Gédal sias tá óhas bhéin seo agus is mílam mo bhuíchas a gháil le stúrathóir Museum Náisiúnta na Héireann Ryan ó Flein don Green Grafador Kim Haughton agus do Macoras Corradi Savinis Mehéin Shim Smith asachtan cuire Queen Value Tronona. Lord Mayor, the photographer Kim Haughton, director of the National Museum of Ireland, Ryan O'Flynn, and dear friend Venus and mine for a very long number of years, Seamus Smith. I want to thank you for your invitation to be here this evening. Where we are now would have been a parking lot for articulated trucks, or it would have been a form of student accommodation. Those were the two proposals to the people going to auction for Collins Barracks. When in government, two people from different parties, David Andrews and I, sat down, and David, who was then had responsibility for defence, said, and we went to government and bought Collins Barracks for the people of Ireland. Now, it was in the middle of a whole series of other decisions that would later unfold in relation to the culture institutions legislation. Because culture is important, and culture is something that isn't defined in the lifetime of any minister or any government, but the decisions you take are long decisions. And that's why I say, in the sense of all problems can be solved, and they can be solved, and after that people go on and they do new things. And you always have to be doing new things, no more than the fact that, for example, administering art centres, being responsible for making film or running museums or whatever, is not a normal bureaucratic task. It requires a special sympathy and empathy with the tasks that you're doing. And some people wear out their lives on it. Many of them, in fact, need to be recognised regularly. And we should pay tribute to those who do public work for the public in general and for what we might call the commons, and who are anxious to extend that into our lives. These galleries have played a very important role in fostering public appreciation and understanding of Irish history. Just a few days ago, I visited the Caravaggio exhibition in the National Gallery, and what's wonderful is to see people of all generations benefiting from access to a gallery that is free and open to the public, and encouraging people of all ages to come, those, for example, who are denied the opportunity in older age, and to those who will be inquiring, who are just curious, youngsters, and so who want to understand that. And indeed, it was very important as well for us to realise the price Caravaggio paid for his art, and his movements and so on. Very interestingly, the difference, for example, between his Italian disciples and his Dutch disciples. The former, for example, not retreating to classicism as some of the people attending in Venice did. Anyway, to come to my business here at this exhibition, which I'm delighted to have been asked to open. As Sabine and I walked through just a few moments ago, Kim's photographs struck me as a celebration of what I think may be one of the more eclectic aspects of Ireland's great wealth, the diversity of his people and the range of their backgrounds and contributions. I remember writing in a poem once about a character who said her face lined with 1,000 stories. I think that the images you have seen are images important like that all of us who are human carriers of contradictions and achievements and defeats as well as everything else. And I think that the images I saw constitute a powerful evocation of the bounty of ideas and achievements and vulnerabilities and commitments of an intellectual and political, artistic or sporting kind that have shaped our collective destiny through 10 decades. It's interesting about photography as well as in the person who sits for a photographer, particularly portrait photography. Some people feel that they have to manage to look successful in some sense. I have also regarded photography also from the time I was Minister for the Arts all those years, 25 years ago. It's one of those arts where the exercise of discretion is called upon in terms of that you have to choose the moment, you have to choose the interpretation, you have to choose the setting, and you have to see what you want to make of it all. It is very apt that this photo series that I've just seen is entitled Portrait of a Century, inviting us, as it does, to revisit, through the combined powers of memory and imagination, all those gifts of the hand, mind, heart and soul and body, through which successive generations of Irish people have contributed to transform and heighten the life of our nation. And even as one goes through and sees all of these images, how different Ireland is from the 1930s, say, for example, or whatever, when the presentation or even the existence of the human body at all was regarded as problematic for some. I think that Kim Haughton has sought to capture the essence of each of the 100 years that have elapsed since those seminal events of Easter 1916. Events which we should have no hesitation or reservation or ambiguity in celebrating, by the way. But whether it is through the portrait of a man, woman, or child born in each year of the century, her project, I believe, is a very successful one. It was ambitious, and I pay tribute to her and to Seamus. It starts with one of the great architects of modern Ireland, T.K. Whittaker, who made such a wonderful contribution to public life in Ireland, and it ends with young Rebecca, Jamin, Charlie and Dan, for whom the future, Untauchi, is brimming with possibilities perhaps yet unknown for us today. And I think as one looks at portraits, and more accurately thanks to Kim's talent and exercise of discretion and her suggestions with subtlety of the uniqueness of the subject, is that taken together, the 100 of them offer a sweeping visual account of a vibrant, diverse and eternally changing Ireland. For example, as we look at the portrait of, I was in Glenstall this morning for a brief visit, and as we gaze at Kim's compelling portrait of the Benedictine, for example, Placid, or the poet, or the singer, the judge, the female rally driver, the woodturner, Kieran McFurbisher, Kieran Forbes, or the winner of the Young Scientist exhibition, the politician, the doctor, the filmmaker, the cook, and so many others. And we must remember as well that it would be a great fallacy to imagine that you can only be one of all of those things. But we're all invited to meditate on what has constituted their work life. What has been the experience of these subjects? How did Kim make her choice? The choices that they, the subjects, made themselves? Or indeed, what choices were imposed upon them? Because that can show too in your portrait, to respond to the infinite possibilities that should exist for human achievement, of the vast opportunities and the limitations for fulfillment that this island has afforded or allowed. And it suggests to us too that we must constitute to provide for both those who are born on it and those who come to it, those who come to us, come to our shore in pursuit of a better life for themselves and their children. I hope that they would see in the diversity of the images that we are not the purveyors of certainties, either certainties invented or certainties decaying. We are invited rather to reflect on change, on the passage of time and generations. I'm often frightened at my own remark in one of my speeches that all we are in the end are migrants in time. But of course I put it more harshly in another poem, and I said that everyone is on their way to being a ruin. But it didn't go down too well when there were a Red Man poem. But at any event, when you're looking in front of the portraits, as Sabine and I did, be it those of T.K. Whittaker or indeed of Leslie Greer or Tom Murphy, reminding ourselves of how the vision and achievements of each generation influence the shaping of the horizons of those who succeeded. And not in any linear sense. It's worth pausing and doing the work for yourself, an exercise of imagination, on the imagination of the subject. As I've said, photography and portrait photography in particular is a fascinating art, but it is a highly demanding genre, one which, while striving for a subtle intimacy, requires a cooperation between the photographer and the subject, a willingness for revelation in the latter, the idea that you're going to go ahead with it. If the former seeks to capture, that is, the photographer, some authentic trait of the latter's inner life. And of course, what emerges isn't predictable at all. In fact, it could be quite serendipitous, as Kim would say. But we must recognize the arbitrariness of choice, and then, following my previous theme, the ephemerality of all images anyway. But this ability to pierce through outward appearances, so as to reveal human frailty or folly or fortitude, is what distinguishes the work of the great portrait photographers, such as Marcus Sternberger or Diana Arbus or Richard Avedon or Henri Cartier-Bresson, or indeed Coleman Doyle, whose portrait appears in the exhibition for the year 1932, the beginning of a dreadful 5 years in Irish history. It is also, of course, a quality that is discernible in the work of the great portrait painters of the previous centuries, and I mentioned the National Gallery earlier. Francisco Goya had an extraordinary ability to reveal the characters of his sitters, even in his most formal portraits of the Spanish royal family, for example. He was an artist who knew how to combine insightful observation and technical mastery to reveal, through a subtle look or a simple gesture, personality features that were not always flattering for his subject, that perhaps unconsciously revealed a dark side. That's a fashionable phrase now, which is not without moral significance, but it revealed a dark side, a flaw of character, or of moral intent. His portrait of Ferdinand VII is a perfect example, I think. It is offered as conventionally perfect, yet it is nevertheless, it reveals Goya's mistrust of the pompous and vengeful monarch who abolished the Constitution and reintroduced the Inquisition. Art, in some of its best intentions anyway, inclines naturally towards the subversive, even when it has been commissioned. The portraits as gifts of perceptive observation and humour, and above all, and this strikes me in this exhibition, empathy, are evident in Kim Haughton's work. I encountered that empathy at first hand during the time I spent with her as she was taking my own portrait of Sadoris and Uachtaráin. At a distance, I think, perhaps more than others. I hope I wasn't frightening or intimidating. But as we see those powers of empathy reflected through the whole series, in all those portraits that capture something of the human vulnerability, the history, the raw or sceptical way of life, or the aspirations of the people they represent. And I think the future century in art will in fact achieve its best results when it is able to handle the theme of universal vulnerability. Kim Haughton's achievement is all the more remarkable in our contemporary age of visual saturation, when we find ourselves so often surrounded by a myriad of images, and in particular repeated, sometimes so often even franchised images of what are referred to as celebrities, that often blend into a stupefying hollowing out of the meaning and difference, a worship of notice-seeking that is banal at best, and certainly without context. And I think that Kim's alternative, sensitive, differentiated approach to her various subjects, the carefully composed images and their settings, succeed in avoiding the pitfalls of stereotyping, uniformity, or triviality. Just for an illustration, a brief one, alternating between classic close-up portraits and wide shots, between interior and exterior settings, Kim's photographs often thwart our expectations. A wonderful exception is Paul McGrath. He is uprooted from the football pitch and transplanted to a forest scene, immersed in an uncanny Celtic twilight atmosphere, with roots of ferns hiding his legendary feet and his vulnerable knee. I think that it is a most beautiful photograph. The brilliant, iconic poet, the wonderful poet, Mara Conti, sits formidable and elegantly dressed in a small back gardens invaded by weeds, and her tranquility seems far removed from what was her exceptional life as a trailblazing Irish female diplomat at the United Nations General Assembly. But who are we to assume what she is thinking? Her reflections might also alternatively, or perhaps even in addition, include those heady days of 1916, which her father, Sean McEntee, spent fighting in the GPO. Or then it might be her conversations with intellectual figures who influenced her, such as Padraig de Brún. Or, of course, far more likely, of her long life with the great intellectual Conor Cruise O'Brien. The portrait of Eunice Adelaide, born in 2007, also uproots preconceptions or expectations. Two-wheel tracks lead us into a beautifully structured image of a black-skinned girl dressed in that white First Communion dress, which evokes a milestone rite of passage for many generations of Irish children. And it is almost as if this was taken on a film set, with the field of corn opening behind. Yet instead of being captured amongst the familiar surroundings of the church steps with proud relatives in attendance, Eunice is standing against big blue skies and expansive horizons, summoning us to a compelling reflection on tradition, identity, place, renewal and possibility and openness. And we may even discern invisible connections between this one I mentioned previously, the female experience between the 95-year-old woman, Maura McEntee, who was the first woman to be called to the bar in Ireland, and whose poetry speaks in the beautiful Irish of the Munster Gaeltacht, of the female experience of love, and the 10-year-old girl standing there whose prospects and expectations are sustained, made possible today, by the work of generations of courageous women who went before her and those who supported them. The image then, finally, this is one that I've invoked last year during our historic commemorations of the centenary of the Easter Rising. Cossan and Ra. The wheel always turns, and good advice that is true for the Cóireála. What generations have created, beautiful, flawed, full of promise and disappointment, we now entrust to the next. And we wish them all well as they continue to grow, create, make music and friends in the midst of new and inherited contradictions, and as they carry on their dreams. So Barracks di Verfont is going to mila mahaki galia as eish the clam, and I have great pleasure in formally opening this exhibition.